Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Maria Zuber, one of the co-chairs of PCAST, and welcome to the second day of our second meeting, the topic of which is climate change, energy, and the environment, extremely important topics which President Biden has asked us explicitly to consider. I'd like to remind everyone that these proceedings are being recorded. I'd also like to remind the members that if you wish to ask a question or make a comment, that you use the raised hand function. So today I'd like to welcome back our members, welcome the general public, and also welcome our speakers. And now I'm going to turn it over for any opening statements to one of our other co-chairs, President's Science Advisor, Eric Lander.
Thank you very much, Maria. We had a great meeting yesterday. We heard from a number of speakers about climate and then energy. And today we're going to continue with some more wonderful speakers. And PCAST is engaged in trying to wrap its mind around the topic and identify areas where we may be able to make useful contributions to the President's agenda here. And so we're delighted to have these public sessions yesterday and today. And this afternoon's session is going to be chaired by our third co-chair. So I will pass over to Frances Arnold.
Thank you, Eric. And I want to welcome everyone to this continuation of PCAST's dive into technologies for decarbonization. And today we'll hear about the potential for integrating fusion into the US energy grid. And our speaker today is Dr. Rich Hawryluk, who recently retired from his position as Associate Director for fusion at the Princeton Plasma Physics Laboratory, which is a Department of Energy national laboratory. Among his many roles there, he headed the Tokamak fusion test reactor from 91 to 97, which was then the largest magnetic confinement fusion facility in the US. He also recently served as chair of the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine Consensus Study Committee that wrote the report, Bringing Fusion to the US Grid. He'll have about 20 minutes for his remarks, followed by discussion with the council. Dr. Hawryluk, please take it away.
Thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity. I'll put up some slides and we'll go from there. I hope by now you can see the slides. This talk is going to be related to some of the talks you heard yesterday and also in your previous meeting. How to bring innovations in science and technology to the forefront and how to engage the private and the public in a partnership to advance fusion energy, which is used to power the stars. So I'm going to talk about that today. I'm going to give you the highlights from National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine report. And I'll begin by giving the key takeaway messages from that report. First of all, the first recommendation is for the United States to be a leader in fusion and to make an impact on the transition to a low carbon emission electrical system by 2050. The Department of Energy and the private sector should produce net electricity in a fusion pilot plant in the United States by the 2035 to 2040 timeframe. The second recommendation was the United States, the DOE should move forward now to foster the creation of national teams, including public-private partnerships that will develop conceptual pilot plant designs and technology roadmaps that will lead to engineering design of a pilot plant that bring fusion to commercial viability. And for this to be successful, for a pilot plant in 2035 to 2040 timeframe, it requires urgent investments by DOE and private industry to resolve the remaining technical and scientific issues to design, construct, and commission a pilot plant. And this afternoon, I'm going to try to go through the background for this, as well as the reasons for these conclusions and recommendations. So to put this in context, let me remind you of a previous NASEM study for burning plasma research that motivated this one. And in particular, there's two key recommendations of that study. The first, the United States should remain an ITER partner as the most cost-effective way to gain experience with burning plasma at the scale of a power plant. And the figure on the right, you see, is a component that was recently delivered to ITER using low-temperature superconducting coils. It will be part of a 13 Tesla magnet, and it's about 3.5 meters across to give you a sense of scale. This is a major accomplishment, and the U.S. has been leading this effort and delivering on its commitments. The boxes in blue, incidentally, are updates since the Academy study to show you some recent developments. The second recommendation, which is really what the focus of today's talk is about, is the United States should start a national program accompanying research and technology, leading to construction of a compact pilot plant to produce electricity from fusion at the lowest possible capital cost. So let's begin with the question, what is the role of a pilot plant? And we talked about that in the report. And what we learned was the utilities foresee a transition to low carbon electrical generation by 2050. And as you heard from this discussion yesterday, there's a desire to accelerate this. We furthermore heard about the need for firm low carbon, non-carbon electrical energy from Jesse Jenkins yesterday. And this has several important roles. And first of all, if you rely solely on renewables, which are very important, you can get fairly far along the path to carbon emission, but then there's a risk of increased cost. To solve that problem, you incorporating by firm low carbon technologies to decrease the cost and improve the grid stability. In addition to these motivations, a pilot plant must provide the technical economic information needed for utilities. We learned about this from utilities as a very important consideration, both in construction costs and in operating costs. This resulted in a set of goals for a fusion pilot plant. I will not go through all of them, but to give you some of the highlights, a pilot plant must produce an amount of fusion power and energy that is sufficiently representative of market needs in order to meet the integrated performance and cost goals, so that the utilities will know what the technical and cost information for first-of-a-kind power plant. And also to demonstrate net electrical production greater than 1 and produce net electrical power of greater than 50 megawatts. And we see this as occurring over a frame starting with electrical production 2035 to 2040 and getting enough reliability information to be in a position to make a decision on a first-of-a-kind power plant by 2045. The report also provides a national strategy for a fusion pilot plant for integrated fusion performance, electrical power, to deal with the materials and manufacturing components which are exposed to radiation, to deal with the deuterium-tritium fuel cycle, if you use that to breed tritium, or to consider alternate fuel cycles. The important issues of reliability and availability, and environmental safety considerations. Regulatory framework will be needed for fusion. The NRC is holding some open meetings. I'd like to report that the United Kingdom is moving ahead very rapidly in this and has already issued a report and is involved in a public consultation to finalize that by the end of the year. They also are looking for siting for their version of a pilot plant. The report talks about the economic considerations for a pilot plant. And we start off with looking at, in today's energy market, that the Asian first-of-a-kind power plant will need to have an overnight construction cost of less than $5 to $6 billion, considering the utilities of the United States. What that drove us to is a conclusion that the pilot plant, even with a reduced generating power of only 50 megawatts, we expect that first-of-a-kind will have much more than that. We should also be constrained to construction costs of $5 to $6 billion just to start the whole process of driving the costs down and realizing that cost is an important economic consideration. Innovation and research investments are targeted to meet the technical economic goals. They're needed to reduce the cost of pilot plant and accelerate the schedule. We also needed to improve the economics of a first-of-a-kind power plant. To meet the challenge of having a viable design by 2028, initial pilot plant operation in the timescale of 2035-2040, innovations in fusion confinement concepts and technology to extract the fusion power and close the fusion fuel cycle should be developed in parallel. We can't do the science and then do the technology. We need to do both, and as well as the design. And this is going to be accelerated by a combination of government and private funding. There have been some important developments in the confinement of fusion. A pilot plant will need to be based on a vetted, well-established confinement physics basis for achieving net gain, plasma gain, well in excess of unity. On the left-hand side, you see results from kinetic fusion energy. You can the so-called triple product is a metric to show how close you are to obtaining net energy gain. Experiments both in Europe, the United Kingdom, as well as the United States, on my previous facility talking about fusion test reactor, have demonstrated being able to produce fusion power and obtaining a net energy gain of about 0.6. Most recently, and this is exciting results we got over the last month, that and results from the National Ignition Facility have shown a very important breakthrough in obtaining energy gain yields of about 1.3 megajoules, and again, an energy gain of about 0.6. An important development in all of this has been the use of computer simulations. They've been widely used in the tokamak program and the fusion and magnetic fusion program, particularly in accelerators that have optimized design. You can see that in some of the results from the German facilities in the green hexagons, as well as in the design of the capsules being used in IFE. And this is an area of strength in the United States to drive performance improvement and design. There are important technical innovations, research opportunities that we need to exploit to make progress. One example is high temperature superconducting magnets. And once again, there's been a major development recently. Commonwealth Fusion Systems and MIT announced the achievement of a 20 Tesla large bore high temperature superconducting coil. The size of this is 2.5 meters across. It's an important development in the pathway to magnetic fusion. Development of structural and functional materials, and in particular assessing the neutron degradation. Development of high heating, plasma heating systems and actuators, high efficiency, and closing the fusion cycle for treating, processing, and developing the breeding blanket. Many of these elements are still at a low level of technical readiness, but as we have seen from the example of the development of the high temperature superconducting coils, with appropriate investments, they can result in rapid advancement. In order to make the development of pilot plant, we believe in diverse participation is needed, and in two different ways, and both are equally important. We embrace the recommendation of the community planning process to embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion, and develop the multidisciplinary workforce required to solve the challenges in fusion and plasma science. And we believe that teams made up of private industries, national labs, and universities bring together important strengths. Industry brings the focus on deploying the usable product on a timeframe that will meet market needs. The national lab and universities bring innovation and deep technical expertise. We need to combine both to make the progress and accelerate the schedule. We discussed public-private partnerships, and we feel that DOE needs to develop an appropriate model for fusion. The NASA Commercial Orbital Transportation Services Program achieved remarkable success. You're all very familiar with that, for commercially competitive space transportation at significantly less cost than government. While the NASA COTS program holds promise, in general, the technical readiness level for space transportation is substantially higher than that for major fusion energy systems. So we recommend that the Department of Energy evaluate and identify the best model to accelerate development and reduce the government cost of fusion pilot plant. And note that for different phases, different models may be needed. And the government does have different models. So the question is, what's the appropriate one for fusion? In our report, we identified a strategy and a roadmap from where we are today to getting to the goals to obtain fusion energy, put energy on the grid, and to evaluate the whole fusion process. We've discussed, and I'm going to focus on the immediate actions, what we need to do today. We need to form national teams. We talked in the report about 2 to 4 national teams to look at different concepts. Some of the concepts, as we talked about in the previous slide, are a fairly high level of maturity, but others are less, but they have engineering promise that we need to exploit. So we need to evaluate those and to develop a conceptual design technology roadmap, which will be different for different concepts, different from magnetic fusion compared to, say, inertial fusion or different types of magnetic fusion. We need to demonstrate the physics basis to go to higher levels of performance, increase the technological readiness levels of the critical technologies, as I mentioned earlier, define the regulatory framework, and identify possible side options. And perhaps most importantly, we need to perform the preliminary design. This is critical to obtain a good cost and schedule basis, and we want to do that by 2028 in order to have a decision to construct. If the preliminary design doesn't have a cost that's commensurate with what we talked about earlier, and it doesn't have a pathway to a viable fusion project, then we need to do even more innovations. But we feel that this plan, if properly funded, we can do the innovation, but clearly there's a clear decision point that's needed to decide how to proceed with this. With success, we will then go on to final design and construction, go into the operating phase with decision on the first of a kind power plant in 2045. We realize that this plan has risks and opportunities, and we try to mitigate those risks. The risk, obvious one, is the schedule risk due to the level of scientific and technological readiness. The schedule, there's another risk, which is the flip side of that, and we won't support the transition to low carbon electrical systems. And clearly, we would like to accelerate that. We want to note that the United Kingdom and China have both stated that they'd like to be the first with fusion on the grid. So there is an opportunity here, but also a risk that others will be first. Obtaining public and private funding is always a concern. There are opportunities. For instance, they gave to the private sector. Over now a period of time, worldwide, the private sector has spent close to $2 billion on developing a fusion energy. We want to impact the transition to low carbon emission electricity, both in the time scale of 2050 and beyond, because the need for low carbon, especially in the developing world, will be great. We want to be a leader in the development of fusion energy. We believe we can mitigate the risk by performing the R&D in parallel with the design. And we've identified clear decision points to evaluate progress so we make the right decisions as we move forward. We believe that this plan has identified the goals, innovation, and a timeline to put fusion on the grid. We recognize that it's a bold plan, and we also feel it's achievable. The United States historically has played a major role in the development of the fundamental science for fusion. The United States can take the lead in this technology or let other countries take the lead. Other countries are very much actively pursuing that. So this is an opportunity for us to move ahead, and I hope with your support we will do so. I want to thank the committee members who participated in this. This is a very broad group of people with expertise, not just in fusion, but also in energy systems, utilities, operators, fission, and material science. And it was a very valuable, very interesting discussion we had with them. And you can find a lot more information on the website. With that, I'd like to open it up for questions and hope we have a good discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If we stop sharing, then we can have a view of all the committee members. Eric, would you like to open?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Thanks for the overview. I want to read the report from the National Academy. So sometimes things just take time, and I'm curious, at the current levels of funding for fusion research, how sensitive are likely breakthroughs and advances to get us much faster to the prize than 2050 with additional funding? And if so, where would that funding go? I'm just curious what you think about the sensitivity versus waiting around for the stochastics of breakthroughs.
I think that we have focused in recent years in the United States largely on the scientific issues, which are obviously important, and there's more work to be done there. But there's opportunities on technical issues, and it's important to do those in parallel. And there also can be a great deal of synergy by working on the scientific issues with the technical, looking for clever technical solutions where you wind up having some scientific issues. And some things do take time, but we believe that with funding both of the technology, which will be done in labs, universities, but also in private industry, combined with the scientific developments, we can move forward on this.
I just following, if we really believe 2050 is going to be a success, you think we should fold that time over a bit and realize that we're way underinvested right now, potentially.
We are underinvested. If we don't increase the investment, we will not meet that timeline. On the timescale we're working with now, that will not be achieved. So you're absolutely correct.
Terrence Tao. You're muted.
Sorry. Thank you for the very nice presentation. So I have a question about whether there's any sort of Constellation Prizes for this project. So clearly the primary goal is to get net energy generation sustainably by a certain target date. But suppose the technology stalls before it gets there. Are there any other economic benefits or environmental benefits that this technology could generate?
Well, the development of plasma science has many other benefits to society. For instance, widely used in other areas like microcircuit fabrication. Every one of your computer chips is using plasmas. In addition, the work that's being done on ICF has national security implications and is part of the National Stockpile Stewardship Program. So there are other aspects of this which are clearly important for society and for the United States. But this report really focused on, because of the statement of task, the efforts associated with fusion development.
Okay, thank you.
Marvin Adams.
Hi, thanks. I'm going to ask a few questions, if I may. So one starts with a kind of summary of the history of lessons learned from the fission industry. And one of those lessons is that in the end, the physics part turns out to be easy compared to the engineering and chemistry and safety realities, which tend to be the drivers for cost and schedule. And I'm just wondering how much that's been thought through so far in the fusion world. So that's question number one. Question number two, is anything other than a deuterium-tritium fuel cycle viable on the timescale you've laid out for the pilot plant? And if not, do you agree that it's important that the pilot plant demonstrate a sufficiently high tritium breeding ratio? Because if fusion is going to have a commercial impact with a DT cycle, we're talking about breeding a lot of tritium. Thanks.
Okay, so these are excellent questions. So let me work my way through them. I absolutely agree with you that you need to combine both physics and technology. And when we do studies, both in this country, but also in other groups around the world, the technology issues associated are extremely important. And the integration of the physics and technology, and this is actually a theme throughout the report, is necessary to really make the progress. The work that we've been doing on ITER has given us a great deal of insight in some of these issues associated with systems integration, systems engineering that need to be done to develop fusion. And, you do need to combine both. We've also seen that recently in the NIF experiments. Let me talk about deuterium, tritium, and alternate fuels. The report was very specific that we were not to evaluate different concepts. So we had to rewrote the report to not only consider DT, but also alternate fuels, as well as different fusion concepts. If we do deuterium, tritium, one of the goals that was on the slides was to actually demonstrate the fact that you can breed tritium sufficient quantities. That's an absolutely critical role for deuterium, tritium operation. And it is something that needs to be done. We think it's doable, but this is an area where, frankly, there are many different approaches to breeding the tritium, and they have to be demonstrated, they have to be evaluated, and that'll be an important technological undertaking associated with this. The scientific requirements, so-called triple product density, temperature, confinement time, that's a metric that we use, is higher for non-DT fuels. So from a scientific standpoint, you have to have a confinement system which is more competent, more capable than the deuterium, tritium one. On the other hand, there are some engineering advantages. There are private investment companies which are actively pursuing non-DT fuels, P-boron 11 being one, but also others, the helium-3, that's actively going on in the United States, but also in Europe. And we basically in our report show what the requirements are for both and discuss that.
Thank you. Laura?
Thank you, Richard. That was very interesting. I've been keeping an eye on fusion energy since I worked on Helios and Antares a long time ago. And of course, that probably left me with negative feelings. And I've been on a lot of panels looking at ITER, et cetera. And I have one concern and then a second concern about that are really more global. The first one is that this has been going on for a really long time, and there's some very serious fundamental physics questions, whether it's plasma or ICF or whatever. And if NIF can make that impressive 0.6 gain, that's great, but you can't build a reactor out of that for ICF. And do we know how we're going to get energy if we ever get a sustained reaction in something like ITER? So I'm not quite sure what the pilot plan is going to be. And so give me some hope that in 2028, we could actually have designs that we could move forward, because this has been going on for so long. The second one is I'd like to know more about, I'm a little concerned that the way NASA works with industry, national laboratories and universities would work on this. This is very, very expensive, very complex, and a lot of gains, monetary gains to be made. And I think the US government may have to play a fundamental role in making sure that this is all done evenly. And also how you would get these groups to work together would be pretty complex, I think. So those are my two questions.
Okay. If I don't answer all of your questions, please ask them again.
Which is really
but I will try. The issue.
In a nutshell, one, do you really think you're going to get a sustained reaction to get energy out of it by 2028? Number two, are you really going to get industry, laboratories, and universities to work together without trying to steal from each other, to put it generally?
So let me begin with the first one. We agree with you. We made very clear in the report that if we don't have a fusion system that can produce more power out than the heating power that goes in terms of either, it'd be nice if it's done in DT, but even if it's done in deuterium, you can make the extrapolation with deuterium tritium. You should not go ahead with constructing a pilot plant. We think that is a metric showing the technical performance that's important. Now, you have to adjust the parameters for non-DT fuels and all that, but this is all doable, all straightforward. The point here is you need to have the technical confidence that the physics is there. We believe that in some of these areas, we're getting close. but we do need to demonstrate the scientific competence, and that's actually explicitly in the report. It's explicitly actually one of my slides. So I agree with that. And I think there's, efforts underway, extensions of what we're saying done on NIP, extensions of what we're doing on magnetic fusion in terms of new concepts which are coming online, new facilities online, which we hope to bridge that gap. The second one you talked about is the public-private partnerships and how we all play together and work together. I actually think you hit the nail on the head there. This is something that we as a community, but also as a country, need to work out the details on. We need to ensure that the government's investment is a wise investment. We also need to make sure that there's a sufficient gain for the private investment to participate. There's work to be done there to how to develop these partnerships. A partnership is only effective if both sides win. And I actually think that, in the short period of time that we did this study, which is about 4 months, the one area that there's more work to be done on, in my opinion, is exactly how we structure public-private partnerships to be most effective to take advantage of this. The opportunities are there. We heard from the private companies that they really want to work together, national labs and universities. We heard from them that they want to work with the private. But now let's figure out what the model is and how we do this. I'm not dismissing your question. I actually is completely supporting it.
Well, we'll need your help on that.
I'll be glad to participate any way I can.
Thanks. Bill Press?
Yeah, hello. I'm looking at your report actually on my screen, and especially at the charge to your report. And the charge is very clear that your report was not supposed to ask the question, should we build a pilot plant? But it says the Department of Energy is presuming to build a pilot plant. How should we do it? And it looks to me like the committee was a good committee to answer that question. It doesn't look to me like it was the right committee to answer the question, should we go ahead and build a pilot plant? For example, such a committee in my mind would have more of an analysis of alternatives, other sources of energy that could be developed in that timescale and what the trade-offs would be. So I think much of what we've heard from you had a flavor of we should do this. That may be your personal opinion, but I wonder if you could tease apart a little bit what part of this is your or the committee's personal opinions versus what part of this do you think was really answering the charge, which simply didn't ask that question?
Well, you're correct. The charge was very specific that we were to basically evaluate and provide guidance to the Department of Energy as well as to the participants, in particular the private sector, as to what's required to move ahead to build a pilot plant, to have a common basis of discussion for both partners to move forward on this. There's a much broader discussion. What is the role of fusion compared to other things we talked about? Some of the things that fusion would have to achieve in order to be effective in terms of impacting energy, and in particular also go to more non-carbon and other considerations. But we did not do an analysis of, say, comparing fusion and fission, or fusion and carbon sequestration. That was not part of our charge. And so, I have tried in my discussion not to give personal opinions, but to adhere to what we discussed as a committee. And I think everything I have discussed, except for the new items which are in blue boxes, were things which you will find actually in the report.
Well, we would love to hear your personal opinion. And what would you recommend to the president if you had the opportunity?
Well, I actually am very supportive of our final conclusions. We need to set up these national teams. We need to basically address the question that was just asked of me. You know, how do we work together to accelerate this process? That would enable us to more efficiently and effectively utilize the strengths of the national labs and universities, as well as private industry, to accelerate the development of fusion. The opportunity is there. I believe we can and should move ahead, but we need to basically get on with it. And I think, you know, that's the first step.
Eric, would you like to jump in?
I would. Can I take another run at Eric Horvitz's question? So on the one hand, you're saying we might have commercial fusion reactors in the 2050s sometime. On the other hand, there are people in industry who are talking about selling commercial reactors by 2030 or so. So, you know, you wonder, is the NAS committee overly pessimistic? Are the people from industry overly optimistic? I don't want to, you know, necessarily press that too hard, but I might ask, suppose it was a national priority to have a vibrant commercial fusion industry by the 2030s, not the 2050s. What would you do? Could you do it? Or is this like incompressible? Or is that, you know, doable, and what would it take?
Okay, so let me try to answer it in the context of what we thought about and said in the report. We do know, because you reported us that some of the fusion companies want to do this faster than what we said in the report. We also know that other countries think it'll take longer. We basically took both of that into consideration. Having said that, the first step is creating these national teams to develop a technology roadmap. As a result of that, some of the concepts may be able to be accelerated faster than what we said. It may also be that as we really dig into it, people will realize that if you want to do all of these things, and in particular demonstrate reliability in operation, it'll take a bit longer. When we talk in the report, we talk about generating electricity in 2035 to 2040 timeframe. But we also felt that in order for industry to have, utilities to have the confidence in technology, we need to run it for a long enough period of time to demonstrate maintenance and operations costs. You can take a more aggressive perspective that once you build this and once you have confidence in building it, you can do these things in parallel. You can maybe move ahead at risk towards building some larger plants and move ahead. We did not examine all possible options and opportunities. We basically laid out what needed to be done, in particular evaluating technology for reliability and utility costs. Clearly, as time goes on, people can re-examine that and come to somewhat different conclusions. But this reflects our considered opinion of these topics.
Thank you.
Maria?
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for that good presentation. Yeah, I have a couple of questions. So first of all, when the regulatory framework that the UK released, they made a statement with it that the UK aspires to lead the world in commercial fusion. So, you know, there's a fusion experiment going on in the UK, experiments in China, and a number of different activities in the US, one at my home institution, MIT, one at Princeton, your institution, and various others. Is there a risk that we could win at the technology and lose on the commercialization because of the short-sightedness or the bureaucracy of or the public sentiment in developing an appropriate regulatory framework? And if so, what do we need to do about it?
Well, let me make a couple of comments. First of all, the NRC is holding some public meetings on developing a regulatory framework in the United States. So they have begun that process, and they have the lead in the United States on developing the regulatory framework. But the UK is moving ahead in some ways more briskly than the United States is on this topic. So that needs to, that is an important consideration that needs to be dealt with. The issue of commercialization is an area where I think if we carefully deal with this, we can have an advantage by engaging the private companies along with the public early on. We can perhaps accelerate this. This is, venture capital and is a strength in the United States as well, and moving into commercialization. The question is how to take advantage of that. And I think, we've already seen a fair amount of venture capital moving ahead in terms of supporting fusion. I can see as if there's a clear effort meant to develop a strong partnership between the public and private sector, this could be symbiotic. It can help both sides and to accelerate. For instance, the Fusion Energy and Science Advisory Committee, which is a very good report that just came out, identified the need for working with the private sector, but did not incorporate how the private sector would actually accelerate the process because it's just done so much. It was really focused on the public part. This is an opportunity to combine it to accelerate the development.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and my second question actually relates to that somewhat. So you're correct. There's been, quite a lot of funding that's going into commercial fusion right now, which I think says in itself that fusion is probably not 40 years away anymore, because companies or venture capital would not be investing in it if it was.
Correct.
But as you noted in your presentation, there are still there are science questions, but there are also engineering this. There are still kind of fundamental investments to be made, and to this point, much of the U.S. fusion budget is being invested in ITER, which is an excellent experiment. But is the investment in ITER going to be adequate or appropriate to develop these other engineering needs for the different fusion experiments? They're not just tokamaks. There's inertial confinement, et cetera, and then there's the TAE approach. So is there enough fundamental investment in maturing to the stage where you can accelerate this in the way that Eric is talking about?
To accelerate this requires additional funding over and above what we have today. And that's very clear in the report, and as I hope was clear in my presentation. We discussed in the report that even today, ITER is providing very valuable information that will help in developing their pilot plants. But to develop some of these concepts, which are not, especially those which are not tokamak specific, is going to require additional funding. But even for the tokamak, in order to get the costs down, we're going to have new innovations that will basically are required, and this is part of our plan, to not just develop a plasma that generates heat, but to capture that heat, breed tritium, breed electricity, and to reduce the cost. And these are very important technology and engineering issues that need to be resolved along with the scientific issues.
So I'd like to jump in and follow up on that. Is there a risk that going for a pilot plant, given the cost, too early would actually suppress innovation in these other concepts, right? Because you will have to choose a technology to move forward with in the pilot plant. Is it possible that would then pretty much cut off development of other technologies?
I think not. And the reason I say that is that our report talked about starting off with 2 to 4 national teams who basically capture different configurations, different technologies, different approaches to developing fusion. We did not, it was not our charge nor our mandate to specify one specific technology or configuration. We did not. But I think the advantage of doing this, and we saw this in the COTS program at NASA, is that not all technologies work out equally well. Not all approaches work out equally well. Having both competition, but also recognizing that some things will be more successful than others is an important element of this.
Ash Carter.
Thank you. A very good presentation. My question was going to be the one that Eric asked, which is why my hand went down, but I'll ask another one instead. It is a strange circle. It's a very good presentation. I thank you very much. As Bill said, it is a strange charge to task a demo when one doesn't exactly know what is being demonstrated. And a demonstration is itself kind of aspirational. And so it is a hard thing to get your arms around, Richard, and I commend you for doing well under that circumstance. But it is a very odd charge. The nugget that I get out of this that I think is most durable is the public-private partnership one. That seems like the clearest positive value proposition here, because as Maria was saying, there is a certain amount of private money flowing in. I don't know, Maria, whether that proves anything about the ultimate wisdom of where that money's going, but it's green, and so we might as well use it for this cause. And so I think the public-private partnership is the part of this that makes the most sense, and that also doesn't require something your committee wasn't charged to do, but what the real world at large needs to do, which is trade off between doing this and doing other things. That's certainly true for the DOE budget, and to some extent it's true for the regulatory agencies as well. And so we need to decide whether in those contexts it's worth the money and worth the trouble to go after a demo like this. But if you can complement it with private sector effort and money, then I think you really have something. So I think that's to me, Richard, that was the most persuasive part of the report. The national teams on a public-private basis, that's where we're most likely to get some value out of the pursuit of this demo.
Thank you. I agree with the importance of the public-private partnerships. I also feel that this report maybe didn't explain all the work that's been done over years in terms of discussing and defining what a demonstration power plant would be, or in this case, a pilot plant, which is somewhat less ambitious. But having said that, it provides very clear guidelines to both the technology people and the scientists as to what they need to do to get there, without being specific as to, you need to put this bolt in that hole, and it has to meet this nuclear grade or not nuclear grade material. That's inappropriate. On the other hand, just a common view as to what's required to go ahead, what the utilities are interested in, I found to be, on a personal level, an illuminating discussion. And I hope other people in the read the report can get that value from that as well.
That's exactly what I got out of it. Thank you. That's a very good way of saying it.
Maria.
Yeah, one more question for me on education. So it's been a real uphill battle developing the next generation of fission plants, okay, the low enrichment, which I believe also we ought to be, investigating carefully, because I think we're going to need all the zero carbon options that we can in terms of evaluating what works best, or maybe we'll even need them all. But the public perception, the regulatory issues, is there anything that we could learn from the process of public engagement and regulation that can help us in the I'll say education process of trying to gain public acceptance for fusion as we move ahead here?
Well, let me give an example. A personal example is I was responsible for the deuterium trading experiments at Princeton. And as you all know, Princeton is located between Philadelphia and New York. And so making sure that we did that properly was absolutely of paramount importance. But to get community acceptance and to engage the community was very important as well. We had many meetings with the community. We had people coming in. We gave them tours of the facility before we brought tritium on site, such that they were confident in what we were doing and they understood what we were doing. So if we're going to go ahead with this technology, and I hope we do, engaging the public at all levels, both from the high policymakers such as your committee, but also from the person down the street who's working in the bakery or the supermarket. We have to engage them all, and they have to be confident and comfortable with this. And this is an important element, this whole issue of outreach and education.
Great, thank you.
Good timing. Well, if there aren't any other questions, Council, this is your last chance. We'll pass it on now to Maria Zuber to introduce the next speaker.